Chapter 6. Tungarth coughed and spat a goblet of dust-blackened spit into the parched earth. The beads in his hair rattled in the dry wind. The Minotaur reached up behind his neck and adjusted the straps on the pack riding high on his muscular shoulders. He twisted his other arm, reaching inside the heavy fabric of his brocaded jacket. His thick fingers scrabbled against his chest, reached his armpit, and gave a long, satisfying scratch. Around him, soldiers of the Mercadian Imperial Guard, 5th Regiment, groaned in an unrelenting heat. A stench rose from their sweating bodies, almost palpable in the dusty air. Around them, the broad plain before the city stretched away into nothingness. Far to the west, a thick brown eddy of dust swirled, spitting out long tendrils of dun-colored grit. A thudding of claws nearby made the Minotaur look up. Astride a nettled Joval rode a familiar green form.
"Speed it up, man!"
trumpeted Squeeze shrilly.
"Keep that line straight! Dress the front or the rear! Rear behind the right or flank left!"
Since facing down a Canaran enforcer a moon turning ago, Squee had pressed every advantage of his species. Goblins were accorded strange honors in Mercadia. It had taken Gerard a whole week to convince his soldiers they did not need to listen to the little commander, that Squee, in fact, wanted them not to listen. After a month of training, the soldiers dutifully ignored Squee's commands. They marched steadily forward, looking neither left nor right. With some difficulty, the goblin turned his large steed until he caught sight of the Minotaur.
"Hello, Tungarth. Didn't see Squeeze having fun. How about you?"
The Minotaur's enhanced muscles bulged and swelled, and he bent his head without saying a word. He thought a good many words, though, and muttered a few under his breath. Squee rode to the rear of the procession, where he found Gerard, similarly mounted. The Venalian was sweating copiously. Near him, a group of young Mercadian nobles, dressed in the uniforms of brigadiers and generals, were carried in litters by slaves. Other slaves walked alongside, waving large wood and parchment fans to create a continuous breeze upon the noble companions. "Oi, Squee! Everything going well up in front?" Gerard asked, not expecting to get any real information from the goblin's answer.
"Oh, yeah. Great. Gerard,
"What?" The Venalian spoke through dry, cracked lips.
ain't you supposed to salute Squee when you're talking to Squee?"
Gerard's lips moved, forming some of the same words Tungarth spoke 50 yards away. Next, the Venalian thought sourly. The little goblin will expect to take Sissy's place as captain of the Weatherlight. That thought jolted Gerard's mind back to the present. With a quick command, he brought the party around in a right turn, then headed them back in the direction in which they'd come. Every day, every foray, the Mercadians improved a bit. He held up a finger, marking wind direction, then rode up beside Tungarth. "Well, what do you think? Are they ready?"
"No,"
the Minotaur growled.
"Their discipline is poor. Too many have not yet mastered fighting skills. If they were to confront properly trained soldiers, they'd be slaughtered."
"I agree. From what Takara reports, the Cho'arm are more than trained soldiers. They're bloodthirsty headhunters. It'd be murder to march into Rushwood with unseasoned troops." Gerard shook his head. "But from now on, we drive these enlistees harder. Who knows what those inhuman monsters have done with Orem?" The shrill voice of Squee broke into the conversation.
"Play dead! Everybody, roll over and play dead!"
In unison, Tungarth and Gerard spoke a curse. The vendor ran a hand lovingly over his display. It's hard to imagine that anywhere in the lands ruled by Mercadia was a farm that could best these Farhalen melons. Firm, ripe, and edge of green showing along the creases in the rind. He drew the morning air into his lungs and let loose a bellow heard across the entire marketplace.
"Fresh scarlet melons! Beautiful Farhallen melons, ripe for the taking! We'll take some nice ripe Farhallen melons!"
Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a long, thin arm reach for the fruit, pull one off the stand. Visions of adolescent boys, the bane of his existence, filled his mind. He spun around, slapping down hard. An outraged squeal was heard, and the merchant found himself facing a small green figure whose face showed surprise, anguish, and anger. It was a goblin. Yet this one was different. The merchant looked at the small green figure carefully. Like everyone else, he was well acquainted with Chiron, but this goblin was smaller than most. His eyes were dull and lacked the malicious glint of those who daily ascended the steps of the Tower of the Magistrate. The farmer snatched back his hand as if he had been burned, his voice switching to a pleasant tenor.
I do beg your pardon, my good sir. I'm pleased my melons have found favor with you.
The thin green face looked inquisitively at him. Behind the thief loomed an enormous brown figure, twisted horns brushing the top of the stall. The farmer gave a whimper of fear and stepped back away from his wares.
Come, Scree. It's only a melon. Give it back and come along.
But Tongarth, Squee's terrible hungry.
You're always terribly hungry.
Not always.
The goblin's face wore an injured expression.
But Squee ain't had decent meals since we got that place.
He looked disdainfully at the melon.
This place ain't got no proper goblin food. What about bugs? What about slugs? Squee ain't seen none around now anywhere, anyhow.
The farmer found his voice.
Pardon me, but the melons are scarce this season. There have been little rainfall in the lowlands. Joam raiders plagued the caravans.
The Minotaur gave a sour grunt.
Put it back and come.
Sir, wait! The merchant ignored the enormous brown creature and deferentially addressed Squee.
Allow me to offer you this melon as a gift.
A young blonde woman who had materialized by the Minotaur's side said to the merchant, We apologize for our friend's behavior. We're a bit new to the city, but thank you for your generosity. The fruit seller performed an obsequious obeisance. Whatever our scaly friends desire. The blonde woman wore an unsettled expression. Yes, we've noticed.
I can't believe they've already sent a contingent after Weatherlight.
Gerard growled, whirling his sword. The blade struck the practice dummy, shearing off its head.
Can't believe they didn't wait till our troops were trained.
Takara took a deep breath of the dusty afternoon air. Gazing at the decapitated dummy, she said with dark humor, It's of any consolation, the force they sent was slaughtered.
Of course they were slaughtered,
Gerard said. He kicked the post and snapped the thing in half. His troops on their practice grounds beyond stared with bald fear at their angry commander.
Of course they were slaughtered. Fighters are the only fighters Mercadia has. It's taken us 6 weeks to turn these lazy sausages into fighting men. Anybody else would have been killed.
Mercadian's eyes grew wider still. They stared down into the dust, practice swords hanging limp in their hands. In 6 weeks, every last one had dropped in weight and bulked their muscles. They had learned to fight hard and bathe afterward. They were even beginning to be impressive with trident and sword, but still they feared their vitriolic commander. Takara, on the other hand, seemed to thrive on his fury. He hissed.
They're trying to get to Weatherlight before we can. They're trying to renege on the deal.
Folding arms over her breastplate, Takara replied, That's not reneging. They met all the demands and will let you have your force when they are trained. The Mercadians never agreed to leave Weatherlight alone. Gerard nodded, sweat falling from his forehead.
Well, we'll just have to take those soldiers sooner.
The Cho Aram aren't just cannibals. They're monsters, if you can believe these Mercadians. The Cho Aram are apparently vicious and human beasts.
All the more reason to whip these sad sacks into shape. And quickly. Orm is a prisoner among them. She still lives, Gerard said. Go find Tongarth and Sisse. I know this is their day off, but from now on, none of us gets a day off until we have the Weatherlight back.
As you wish, Takara said, striding away. Gerard turned toward the Mercadian troops, barked out,
Back to the drill!
The Minotaur grumbled as they left the merchant's tent. Squee greedily seized another melon and began to munch on it, the juice dribbling over his chin. A porter rushing along with a heavy basket of fruit on his shoulder barreled into the goblin and sprawled, the basket spilling bright red berries. Hannah and Tongarth bent to retrieve what they could. Seeing Squee, the porter gave a sudden shriek and rushed off, leaving his basket and scattered wares behind him. Tongarth gave a snort, trying not to laugh.
Kyran goblins? What sort of place is ruled by goblins?
Hannah shook her head. I don't know. It's clear they're very important.
Goblins? What about goblins?
Squee appeared at her elbow, his nose and mouth smeared with red berries. Hannah said sharply, You shouldn't eat things until you know what they are.
Yeah, but how are you going to know what they are without tasting them?
The trio passed on down the street. Every few yards they were confronted with yet another merchant shouting and gesturing. It was a dizzying spectacle. The whole city was dizzying. During their 6-week stay, the crew had come to realize the labyrinth of streets was ruled by a contorted, recursive geometry. A person could reach a landmark not by walking toward it, but by walking away.
A woman striding down a straight street would discover that she had been going in circles. A man wandering in circles would quickly reach his destination. It was as though a city of millions had been impossibly squeezed into a city of 100,000. Space folded and refolded, maddeningly unpredictable. Sobriety led to utter confusion. Delirium led to truth. Squee did quite well under these conditions. Did not even notice the disparities. Hannah's navigational sense was intrigued. She had plotted neighborhoods with various projections and found no system of coordinates adequate. Tongarth and other linear thinkers spent their days hopelessly lost and suffering constant, raging headaches. Tongarth stumped irritably along, buyers and sellers scattered before his hooves. The navigator looked at him and was struck at the change that had come over the Minotaur. His bulky muscles were impressive, his frame more imposing than before his imprisonment on Volrath's stronghold, yet in his brown eyes there was a haunted look as if something deep within him had died. On an impulse, she put her hand on his broad arm and guided the Minotaur to the base of a small tree. Here there were no stalls, and the noise was somewhat diminished. Hannah sank to the ground with a sigh of relief. Tongarth remained standing. Squee squatted near them for a short time and then nosed off. "Come, my friend, sit down." She tugged at Tongarth's tunic. He cleared his throat and knelt by her side with every appearance of reluctance. "You want to tell me what the matter is, Tongarth?"
No, you would not understand.
"Perhaps I would. Suppose I tell you what I think is troubling you, and you tell me if I'm wrong?" He stared sullenly into the middle distance where the tower of the magistrate rose against the lemon sky. Hannah followed his gaze. "You were hurt in the stronghold. However, Volrath didn't only torture you, he altered you. So much I've already heard from Gerard, but I think there's something else to be said. I think you're afraid of something."
Afraid?
Hannah shrank back at the Minotaur's roar.
I am afraid of nothing.
He looked at her and blew a deep breath through his great nostrils.
Yet, you are right. I'd prefer I had died on Wrath.
Hannah sighed in exasperation. "Oh, really? Well, that would be a lot of help to us here, wouldn't it? Then we'd be mourning you and Ciri." She leaned back, appraising the Minotaur. "Is it the physical changes that bother you?" Tongarth stared silently into space. When Hannah started to get up, he spoke.
Ever since I was a tiny calf, I was told how handsome I was. I thought myself the handsomest of any Minotaur in my tribe. I was more than handsome. I was beautiful.
He turned and looked her full in the face.
Among my people, destinies are written on our faces, our bodies. I knew I would grow to be a great warrior, because I looked like a great warrior.
Hannah said thoughtfully. "Surely there must be more to being a warrior than looking the part?"
There is, of course. One must train long and hard, hone one's fighting skills, prove oneself against others. But looks are by no means unimportant.
He looked at her sharply.
Tell me this is not true among humans.
"It isn't," protested Hannah.
Of course it is. Do you mean to tell me, Hannah, when you look at Gerard, you do not see one who looks like a hero?
Though Hannah started to speak, the Minotaur interrupted.
Sometimes during our journeys together, I heard you and others aboard Weatherlight speak of the great heroes of the past. Did you ever notice that in all those tales, the men are tall, strong, and handsome? That the women are exquisitely beautiful? Would you have enjoyed those stories just as much if the women would have been ugly, the men short, fat, and deformed? Would you still follow Gerard if he looked like a rotten potato?
Hannah spoke coldly. "I certainly hope that I can see beyond the surface. Gerard is heir to the legacy. That's why we follow him." The Minotaur shook his great head.
If Squee were heir to the legacy, would you follow him?
Hannah laughed. The idea of anyone following Squee anywhere was absurd. "But you're still exceedingly handsome, still young and strong."
No. Strong, but twisted. Volrath's soldiers placed me in a room where a beam of light shot from the ceiling. No matter which way I turned, I could not avoid it.
His voice cracked at the memory.
Finally it struck me, it pinned me. I could feel it within me. My bones turned and twisted. My skin felt as if it was breaking. When it stopped, Grevenilvec came. He looked at me and laughed. He said I might make a good first mate for him.
The Minotaur turned and stared at the blonde woman by his side.
And for a moment, I could see myself standing by his side. I could see myself and my new, scarred body standing on the deck of that dark ship as it swept across the skies of wrath. More than that, I wanted to be there.
He lifted his great fist and slammed it into the ground.
Strong but twisted.
Hannah jumped as the earth quaked. There was a long silence, and then she said cautiously, "But you were rescued."
Yes, but I might have joined the dark ship had not Gerard rescued me.
Hannah shook her head. "No, you wouldn't have, Tungarth. Anyway, the past doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here today, and right now you're the first mate of Weatherlight." She cleared her throat. "Maybe you have a point about appearances, but even if that's the case, I can tell you that you look like a first mate to me. Indeed, you look like a hero." Tungarth remained deep in thought for several minutes. Then he clapped Hannah on the shoulder.
Perhaps I have been brooding too much on this matter.
The conversation was ended abruptly by the arrival of Takara. "Tungarth, Gerard wants you and Sisay. He's ready to form up the troops for inspection. He's ready to march the Rushwood." Dust was everywhere. Grit filled sky and earth. It stung eyes and scoured noses, clung to teeth and poured into ears. It clogged pores and tickled in necklines and filled in shaggy pelts of Jovals. Mercadian dust magic moved whole armies rapidly across the plain, but they arrived looking like dirt clods. Riding a great rust-colored Joval, Gerard led the Mercadian Imperial Guard, 5th Regiment, through the dust cloud. To his right hand rode Takara, wrapped in a sandy scarf. To his left were Sisay and Tungarth. Gerard wanted his crew members beside and behind him, the best and most loyal fighters in his elite division. At their backs rode 100 highly trained Mercadian warriors. Though grit covered their faces, they rode in even ranks. Amid swirling dust, the troops were mere shades of brown, yellow, and gray, but their weapons gleamed. Behind these riders came the most fearsome troops of all, Catarans. The mercenaries were a motley and bloodthirsty band, some human but most inhuman, monstrous. They were cruel and unruly, loyal to Gerard only through their commander, Xeric. Gerard whistled a distinctive trill. Out of the blinding cloud behind him rode Xeric. He was a Cataran enforcer, much like the one Squee had cowed in the marketplace that first day. Demonic eyes gleamed in his bulbous skull. 4 mandibles plucked sand from a fangy mouth. 4 arms jutted from his twisted shoulders. Clawed hands clutched the beast's reins, and barbed nubs held a lizard skin cloak tight to his back. This taloned horror was no more than a brigand, yet the Mercadians had hired him and insisted that he and his gang accompany the crew. Gerard couldn't refuse. "How close are we to Rushwood?"
Close.
The creature's face was a mask of brown dirt.
Between a mile and quarter mile.
Gerard nodded. "All right. Tell your people to fight only on my orders, counting on surprise and skill in arms, not brute force." The fangy smile on Xeric's face was indecipherable.
Oh yes, I'll tell them.
He reined in his Joval and dropped back through the ravening storm. Takara leaned toward Gerard, putting a hand on his knee. "You better be ready to fight, Gerard."
I don't trust the Catarans,
Gerard replied.
They could just as easily kill Orem as the Cho'Aram.
"And if the Cho'Aram have already killed our friend, what then?" Gerard's smile was humorless.
Then I'll let the Catarans kill as many as they want.
The dust cloud suddenly thinned and fell away entirely. The ever-present shroud of tan dissipated, replaced by a searing yellow sky, parched brown soil, and the vast green wall of the Rushwood. The ancient forest was an imposing sight. Tree trunks as wide around as mansions reached to the sky. They were packed as tightly as teeth in a tightened smile. The lower boles and root bulbs had fused together into a smooth and sloping wall 100 feet high. Above it, trunks divided and soared straight up, mossy columns and a colossal temple. They supported a lofty and dense ceiling of foliage and vines. Trees receded into dim infinity.
"Is the right spot, Sisay?"
Gerard asked. She nodded grimly, staring at a small map scroll. "Yes, if its Mercadian cartography can be trusted." Sisay wiped dust from her face. The beautiful sheen of her skin appeared beneath it. She stared at the dark forest ahead. "There's another world in there, Gerard. Outsiders are not welcome. It's no wonder the Catarans before us got slaughtered. Takara studied Sisay. Those Cho-Arms survive in a forest where Catarans don't. Perhaps they survive because the forest wants them to, Sisay replied. Stories in the Mercadian libraries tell that Rushwood is a living entity and great thinking thing. It will know when we enter. It will marshal defenses. Gerard nodded. Then let us enter respectfully. Fight only if you're attacked. Relay the word. He set heels to his Joval's flanks. He rode up the slanting ground beneath the forest wall. His tawny mount flung back the bank easily. It bounded weary of dust flats and eager for woodlands. The Joval's claws sank into the loamy soil. Takara, Sisay, and Tangarth followed in his wake, and the Mercadian guard and Catarans brought up the rear. Though individually soft-footed and massed, the Jovals made a vast rumble on the sloping ground. Gerard's mount reached a wooden wall and climbed. Claws gripped ancient bark. The beast hurled itself upward. Gerard leaned forward in the saddle. With its 6 legs, the Joval ascended with greater ease than a typical cat. In moments, it topped the forest wall and entered the cool, wet space between trees. Bounding over lichen and spongy humus, the tiger creature led the mounted corps into the forest.
So,
Gerard muttered to himself.
this is Rushwood.
Glaring dust gave way to damp murk. Sweat turned cold on necks. Shouts and rumbling footfalls were swallowed in a preternatural hush. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the army charged inward. Gerard motioned Sisay up beside his surging steed. Her mount matched his stride for stride. So quiet were their footfalls across moss and mushroom that the 2 old friends could speak to each other in hushed whispers.
Where from here?
Gerard asked.
Should have brought your navigator,
Sisay replied with a wry smile.
though I wouldn't have flung Hannah into these fights either.
She consulted the map scroll.
We head southeast from here to the river. After we cross it, we head due south to reach the center of the wood. Then, of course, we hope Weatherlight is there.
She's there, all right. Gerard's eyes were far away. Does she call to you?
What?
Weatherlight. Does she call to you? Gerard asked.
Sisay blinked. Maybe. Maybe I've just never listened.
She calls to me, Gerard said, his voice husky among the rushing bulls. Even when I fled away from her, Weatherlight called to me. Sisay shrugged. The green murk grew deeper around them, and a ghostly sliver glow shone among the vast trees.
That's why I'm Weatherlight's captain, and you're her comrade, her destiny.
She's there, all right, Gerard repeated, gazing into the darkness. She's in the center of the forest. The Cho-Arm took her there. A speculative look crossed Sisay's face.
I think Takara's been listening too much to these Mercadians. All this inhuman monster nonsense. Those weren't monsters we fought at the farm. The way they appeared and took Weatherlight, like the ship called to them too.
Hesitantly, she ventured.
Perhaps she's part of their destiny too.
Muscle in Gerard's jaw leaped. We'll see soon enough. Ride until dark and then set up camp. No fires tonight, nothing that might offend the forest. Sisay gave an appraising nod. The forest scrolled dizzily past her mount.
Yes, I think Weatherlight does call to you.